Did television secretly scare viewers more in the 1960s than cinemas ever dared? Some broadcasts drew angry complaints. Others vanished when networks erased their tapes. A few introduced images that remained buried in childhood memory for decades. Tonight, we reopen TV nightmares that pushed 60s television far beyond comfort, good taste, and anything audiences thought could appear at home. Before we enter the first nightmare, like this video, share it with another classic horror fan, and subscribe to our channel. Number 21. The Eye Creatures, 1965. A quiet Texas night becomes crowded with danger when a strange craft lands outside a small town. Teenagers notice the invasion first, but the adults are distracted by routine police work and their own disbelief. Soon, swollen creatures covered with staring eyes begin moving through fields, roads, and parked cars, searching for isolated victims. The movie's most remembered sequence has the creatures surrounding young people in darkness, while their many eyes catch the light. The suits look inexpensive, yet that roughness gives the scene an accidental nightmare quality. These invaders do not arrive above a futuristic capital. They appear beside ordinary roads where any viewer might have stopped after sunset. Made for television as a loose remake of Invasion of the Saucermen, the production replaces cinematic polish with uncomfortable closeness. Its monsters look less advanced than diseased, which makes them strangely unpleasant. The film went too far not through realism, but through its refusal to make the creatures elegant or safe. Their staring faces turn a familiar teenage evening into something ugly, absurd, and impossible to forget. Number 20. Zontar, The Thing from Venus, 1966. An idealistic scientist believes an intelligence from Venus can rescue humanity from war, greed, and political failure. He helps the visitor reach Earth, expecting a teacher. Instead, Zontar disables technology, controls important citizens, and begins preparing the planet for silent submission. The most unsettling idea is that the invasion succeeds because a human being invites it. Zontar releases small flying servants that attach themselves to victims and remove their independence. One famous scene shows a creature descending as a frightened person realizes that friends who still look normal no longer think for themselves. This television remake of It Conquered the World uses laboratories, caves, and ordinary rooms instead of grand battlefields. The smaller scale makes the danger personal. People do not disappear in explosions. They simply stop behaving like themselves. What pushed the movie beyond harmless science fiction was its pessimism. The scientist who wanted to improve humanity becomes responsible for nearly destroying it. The warning is brutal and simple. Anyone promising perfect order may actually be offering a quieter form of slavery, and good intentions can become the easiest door through which a monster enters. Subscribe now and turn on notifications for more forgotten films, lost broadcasts, and classic horror mysteries. Then tell us whether low-budget monsters can still frighten you when the story behind them is strong. Number 19. Curse of the Swamp Creature, 1966. Deep inside the Louisiana wetlands, a scientist conducts experiments meant to accelerate human evolution. His isolated laboratory allows him to treat workers and visitors as materials rather than people. When the research produces an amphibious humanoid, the swamp becomes both a prison and a hunting ground. The most memorable sequence shows the creature rising from dark water, covered in scales and mud, then moving toward the laboratory like the final result of every cruel decision made inside it. The monster is not an outside invader. It is evidence. For television, the movie dealt surprisingly openly with involuntary experimentation, exploitation, and the belief that certain lives could be sacrificed for progress. Its social attitudes are dated, but the moral ugliness remains clear. The costume may look simple today, yet the true horror is the laboratory's absence of limits. Long before modern stories about secret research facilities, this film suggested that isolation allows powerful people to stop seeing others as human. Nothing in the swamp feels clean, and no direction seems safe once science loses its conscience. Number 18. Creature of Destruction, 1967. A hypnotist named Basso claims that his assistant, Dorina, can predict future tragedies. During public demonstrations, she enters a trance and describes attacks involving a strange sea creature. Her predictions begin coming true, raising a disturbing question. Is she seeing the future, or is someone forcing her to create it? The seances provide the movie's defining scenes. Dorina sits helplessly while Basso confidently explains powers no one else understands. A prehistoric creature then appears near the water, turning his stage performance into physical danger. Made as a television remake of The She Creature, the production has limited effects but an uncomfortable emotional center. Basso slowly erases Dorina's identity, telling her who she was in a previous life and what she must become now. That manipulation is why the story goes further than its monster suit suggests. The creature can be dismissed as fantasy. Basso's control cannot. He turns a vulnerable woman's fear into entertainment and tries to make his own version of her permanent. In this film, the respectable showman is far more frightening than the thing he claims to command. Number 17. In the year 2889, 1967. Despite its futuristic title, the story unfolds shortly after a nuclear catastrophe. A small group of survivors gathers in an isolated valley that offers temporary protection from radiation. Food is limited, trust is fragile, and altered figures move beyond the house. The most remembered sequence brings a radiation-damaged attacker toward the valley. The figure still resembles a person, but exposure has changed both body and behavior. The survivors are forced to face a possible version of their own future. Made for television as a remake of Day the World Ended, the film uses one main location and a small cast. Those limitations strengthen the atmosphere, because every argument happens inside a home, surrounded by an invisible, poisoned world. For viewers living through Cold War tension, the premise was not distant fantasy. Families watching at home saw another household deciding who deserved uncontaminated food and who might be too dangerous to shelter. Its harshest message is that disaster does not automatically improve people. The end of civilization removes laws and comforts, but selfishness survives perfectly well. Humanity may endure the first explosion, only to destroy itself slowly afterward. Number 16. Mars Needs Women, 1968. A biological crisis on Mars has created a severe imbalance between male and female births. Facing extinction, a group of Martian visitors travels to Earth, intending to take 5 women back to their planet. The chosen targets are intelligent, skilled, and physically healthy. One Martian, Dop, begins developing genuine feelings for scientist Marjorie Bolan, placing emotion against the orders he has been given. The movie's most unsettling sequence is the selection process. Human beings are observed and reduced to useful qualities by visitors who believe desperation justifies abduction. Their polite behavior makes the plan worse because they never think of themselves as villains. The sensational title and tiny budget often make the production seem harmless, but its central idea is deeply invasive. Accomplished women are treated as biological resources by outsiders who believe their survival matters more than consent. What pushed the film too far was its calm logic. Every step of the mission is explained reasonably, yet the mission remains horrifying. Civilized language does not make an uncivilized act acceptable, and a smiling captor is still a captor. Number 15. It's Alive, 1969. A traveling couple enters an isolated property while searching for directions. Their host, Greeley, appears helpful until they discover the secret beneath his home, a prehistoric creature living inside a cave. Greeley has been feeding visitors to the animal and relying on the remote location to hide what happened. A paleontologist becomes trapped as well, forcing the captives to escape before they become the next meal. The strongest scene brings the monster out of the darkness, while Greeley watches with excitement. The creature's limited design is partly concealed, allowing shadows and the prisoner's terror to create much of the effect. Greeley's pride is more disturbing than the costume. He treats the discovery as private property and other people as food. What made the television movie unusually nasty was its betrayal of hospitality. The victims enter because they need help. Their host understands that no one can hear them and uses friendliness as a trap. The film also rejects the romantic idea that finding a prehistoric survivor would automatically be wonderful. Scientific importance means nothing when the person controlling the discovery has no moral limits. Number 14. The Cape Canaveral Monsters, 1960. America's race toward space becomes the doorway for an invasion when 2 alien beings seize the bodies of people killed in a road accident. Wearing human faces, they hide inside an underground base and begin sabotaging rocket launches at Cape Canaveral. Scientists notice that important equipment is failing too often to be coincidence, but the enemy already understands how easily a familiar appearance defeats suspicion. The movie's strangest sequence involves a damaged alien body and a severed arm that continues to matter after the creature has changed hosts. For television audiences in 1960, that image was unusually unpleasant, especially inside a story built around national pride and technological progress. Rather than arriving in shining spacecraft before the whole world, the invaders work quietly, steal identities, and attack the space program from within. Their plan makes every technician and observer potentially untrustworthy. What pushed the film too far was its combination of body theft and Cold War anxiety. The future was supposed to begin at Cape Canaveral. This movie suggested that humanity might unknowingly carry its enemies toward the stars. Even technology feels unclean. Number 13. Famous Ghost Stories, 1961. Vincent Price appears as a playful poltergeist who introduces the story of a musician haunted by a woman whose death he allowed. The television movie reshapes material from tormented into a supernatural presentation intended to launch a continuing horror series. But the complete film survives as its own strange broadcast experiment. At the center is Tom Stewart, a jazz pianist preparing to marry another woman. When his former lover threatens to expose their relationship, she falls from a lighthouse. Tom could save her, but chooses silence and watches her disappear into the sea. The haunting begins with small reminders. A missing watch returns, seaweed appears where it should not, and a disembodied voice repeats his name. The most famous sequence interrupts the wedding, when the dead woman's presence turns a public celebration into a judgment. Price's introductions add humor, but they also make the audience feel as though the ghost has taken control of the program. He does not merely host the nightmare. He seems delighted that television itself has become haunted. What made the movie go too far was Tom's moral cowardice. He is not pursued because he made one mistake in panic. He repeatedly hides evidence and harms others to protect his future. The supernatural revenge therefore feels less like random punishment than a truth forcing its way into every room where he attempts to begin a new life. The lighthouse setting gives the guilt a physical shape. Tom repeatedly climbs the same structure where he made his fatal choice, and the sea below seems to return objects that should have disappeared. A child becomes endangered after discovering too much, forcing Tom to choose again between confession and self-protection. Each attempt to silence the past makes the haunting stronger. By the climax, music, wind, and the dead woman's voice combine until his carefully planned marriage can no longer hide what happened above the rocks. The host's delighted smile makes every warning feel strangely celebratory. Number 12. The Canterville Ghost, 1968. An American family moves into an English castle and refuses to be impressed by its resident spirit. Sir Simon has frightened generations of owners, but modern confidence, cleaning products, and noisy children make his traditional methods seem powerless. Every chain, bloodstain, and dramatic appearance is treated as an inconvenience rather than a warning. The comedy gradually reveals a sadder story. Sir Simon is trapped because of an old crime and cannot find peace. His performances are not simply attacks on the living. They are the habits of a spirit who has repeated the same role for centuries because he no longer knows how to become anything else. The television movie's most memorable scenes involve the ghost preparing elaborate scares only to be humiliated by children who set traps for him. Yet the mood changes when young Virginia listens rather than laughs. She discovers that helping him may require entering a frightening spiritual place no other family member can reach. Based on Oscar Wilde's story, this complete television film mixes family fantasy with images of guilt, death, and imprisonment. The castle is bright enough for comedy, but its hidden history remains severe. What pushed the production beyond a harmless ghost adventure was Sir Simon's exhaustion. He does not ultimately want revenge. He wants an ending. Virginia's compassion forces the audience to see the frightening figure as someone punished long after the original crime could be repaired. The famous final discovery of his remains gives the story physical weight. The family's jokes cannot erase the fact that a body was hidden and a soul remained trapped beside it. Beneath the humor is a disturbing idea. A haunting may be nothing more than suffering that has continued because generations found it easier to laugh than to listen. The children's practical jokes are funny only until the audience recognizes how much Sir Simon has lost. He rehearses old identities, remembers previous victims, and treats failure as another humiliation in an existence already defined by punishment. Virginia finally recognizes the sorrow hidden beneath his performance and ancient pride. Number 11. Le Secret de Wilhelm Storitz, 1967. A young man travels to Hungary to attend his brother's wedding, only to discover that the bride's rejected admirer, Wilhelm Storitz, has threatened to prevent the marriage. Storitz possesses a scientific formula that can make a human being invisible, allowing jealousy to move through the household without a body anyone can confront. The first attacks appear impossible. Objects shift, voices speak from empty rooms, and wedding preparations are ruined by someone who can stand beside the victims without being seen. The invisible intruder does not merely want revenge on the bride. He wants everyone to understand that ordinary law and physical protection cannot reach him. The television movie's strongest sequence disrupts the wedding itself. An unseen presence moves among the guests, turning a public promise into confusion and panic. Every open doorway becomes threatening because Storitz could already be inside. Adapted from Jules Verne's novel, the French production treats scientific discovery as gothic terror. The formula does not create a noble explorer. It gives a possessive man freedom from witnesses and consequences. What made the film go too far was its understanding of invisibility as personal violation. Storitz can enter bedrooms, interrupt private conversations, and manipulate objects while victims question their own senses. No wall provides privacy against someone who cannot be located. The science fiction premise therefore becomes a story about control. The rejected suitor refuses to accept another person's choice and uses technology to remain present after every relationship has ended. His greatest weapon is not physical strength. It is the knowledge that his victims must fear every empty space. The invisibility also destroys evidence. Witnesses can describe effects, but cannot identify the person producing them, allowing officials to treat each attack as hysteria or sabotage. Every empty room becomes a possible hiding place for revenge without any warning. Number 10. La Zarpa, 1967. A household becomes trapped inside a mystery involving fear, suspicion, and an unseen threat whose reach is suggested by the title, The Claw. Ordinary relationships begin to fracture as characters search for the person responsible, yet every new clue makes familiar faces appear less trustworthy. Produced for Spanish television, the film relies on confined interiors and performance rather than expensive effects. Doors, curtains, and narrow passages become visual traps. A hand entering the frame can carry more danger than a fully displayed creature, because the audience sees the attack before understanding who controls it. The movie's most effective sequence builds around the anticipation of contact. A character hears movement, turns toward an apparently empty space, and waits while the threat approaches from outside the visible picture. The delayed reveal allows imagination to create something larger than the production could have shown directly. What made La Zarpa unsettling was its treatment of the home as evidence. Rooms preserve arguments, objects reveal secret movement, and every locked entrance raises the possibility that danger is already inside. The film also reflects the style of early Spanish television horror, where censorship and limited resources encouraged implication. Terror had to be carried through voices, shadows, and moral unease. What pushed it too far was the idea that violence could remain almost anonymous. The claw becomes less a monster than a sign of hidden intention. Until the responsible person is exposed, every character must wonder whether affection, duty, or politeness is simply the glove covering it. Because surviving information about the production is limited, its atmosphere matters more than elaborate mythology. The title promises a physical attacker, but the television staging turns that promise into psychological pressure. The film's restraint is part of its menace. Number 9. Evil Brain from Outer Space, 1966. A powerful criminal intelligence survives as a living brain and directs attacks against Earth from beyond the planet. Only the masked hero Starman can stop a network of alien agents, strange creatures, and scientific weapons, controlled by a mind that no longer requires a human body. Created for American television from edited Japanese film material, the complete movie moves with the speed of a nightmare assembled from cliffhangers. Laboratories, flying enemies, transformed bodies, and sudden attacks appear one after another, giving viewers little time to recover. The title image is the film's greatest source of unease. A brain separated from ordinary humanity, but still capable of planning, commanding, and hating. It represents intelligence without empathy, preserved only for domination. One especially disturbing attack places innocent people near a killer whose altered appearance hides an inhuman purpose. Violence is often stylized, yet the story repeatedly places civilians and families directly inside the alien campaign. What made Evil Brain from Outer Space go too far was its relentless body horror. Human shape is never reliable. Agents can be changed, controlled, or replaced, while science produces life forms designed only to obey. The film's rough editing and exaggerated effects may appear chaotic today, but that chaos creates a unique television experience. It feels as though several nightmares have been forced into one broadcast and connected by the brain's invisible command. Number 8. The Doomsday Flight, 1966. Passengers board a commercial airliner without knowing that a bomb has been hidden aboard. The device is controlled by altitude. It will remain harmless while the plane stays high, but detonate when the aircraft descends to land unless a ransom is paid. Rod Serling's script turns the basic safety procedure of landing into the central threat. The crew can continue flying, but fuel is limited. Airports offer rescue, yet approaching the runway may trigger disaster. Every possible solution contains its own deadline. The television movie's most famous sequence involves attempts to keep the aircraft above the dangerous altitude, while authorities search for a place and method capable of bringing it down safely. Passengers gradually learn that the calm announcements are hiding something much worse than bad weather. The bomber never needs to enter the cabin. He controls everyone through a device designed around the physics of flight, turning distance from the ground into temporary life. What made the doomsday flight go too far was its realism. No ghost, alien, or ancient curse created the danger. A single person studied an ordinary machine and found a way to transform its safest moment into a trap. The film reportedly inspired attempted copycat extortion, showing how closely its premise resembled a workable crime. That knowledge makes the suspense more uncomfortable. Television was not presenting distant fantasy. It was demonstrating how modern systems could be exploited by someone patient enough to understand them. Number 7. Honeymoon with a Stranger, 1969. A woman traveling in Europe awakens beside a man who claims to be her husband. She insists he is an imposter, but photographs, documents, hotel staff, and personal details all support his story. The more urgently she protests, the more unstable she appears. The television movie builds terror through social agreement. One stranger could be lying, but an entire environment seems prepared to confirm the lie. The woman searches for the husband she remembers, while the man beside her calmly explains that confusion or illness has changed her perception. The strongest sequences occur when she presents evidence that should prove her identity, only to discover that the evidence has already been altered or interpreted against her. Every official response closes another exit. Based on the mystery play, Trap for a Lonely Man, the film uses the honeymoon setting with particular cruelty. A trip associated with trust and intimacy becomes a situation in which the closest person in the room may be part of a plan to erase her reality. What made Honeymoon with a Stranger go too far was its portrayal of gaslighting before the term became common in everyday discussion. The threat does not need to lock the heroine in a cellar. It surrounds her with people who smile, remain polite, and agree that she cannot trust herself. Her fear therefore becomes evidence for the opposition. The louder she demands help, the easier it is to describe her as irrational. Even escape seems dangerous, because authorities may return her to the man claiming legal responsibility. The film's deepest nightmare is not that a stranger has replaced her husband. It is that identity can be stolen when enough convincing people repeat the same false story. The European setting adds another layer of isolation. Language, unfamiliar officials, and distance from home make it easier for the conspiracy to control which version of events appears reasonable. Every person with local power seems connected to the man beside her. His confidence forces her to question whether trauma has altered more than her surroundings. Number 6. The War Game, 1965. A nuclear attack strikes Britain, and the film follows the destruction through the style of a television documentary. Officials attempt to maintain order, medical services collapse, and survivors discover that preparation manuals offer little protection against heat, radiation, hunger, and mass displacement. The most famous sequences show the immediate aftermath with disturbing calm. Injured civilians move through ruined streets, while a controlled narrator explains what authorities might do. That distance between voice and image makes the suffering feel official, measured, and horrifyingly possible. The BBC produced the film for television, but withheld it from broadcast for 2 decades. Its realism, political implications, and relentless presentation were considered too disturbing for the audience it had been made to reach. Rather than following one heroic family, The War Game examines systems failing across an entire community. Police are ordered to manage panic, hospitals run out of resources, and moral rules collapse under conditions no government can repair quickly. What pushed it too far was the absence of cinematic comfort. There is no secret weapon, last-minute rescue, or single villain who can be defeated. The disaster grows from policies and weapons that already existed. The film also attacks the language of survival planning. Instructions sound organized until placed beside the scale of actual devastation. Citizens who followed every rule remain exposed to forces beyond individual control. For viewers in the 1960s, the images would not have belonged to ancient history or distant fantasy. Nuclear tension shaped daily news. The movie simply removed the protective language surrounding that tension and showed what the threatened event might look like inside British homes. Its most controversial achievement was making apocalypse feel administrative. The end of ordinary life arrives through announcements, forms, emergency powers, and decisions about who can still be helped. Civil defense scenes become especially disturbing because ordinary citizens are asked to perform impossible tasks. Volunteers must identify bodies, manage displaced families, and enforce rules while facing the same radiation and grief as everyone else. Children absorb official explanations that adults no longer believe. The film was denied its planned television audience precisely because it made that claim look dishonest. Number 5. Chamber of Horrors, 1966. Two proprietors of a wax museum assist police in capturing Jason Crevette, a calculating killer whose crimes are staged with theatrical cruelty. Sentenced to execution, Crevette escapes custody by cutting off his own hand, disappears, and later returns with a metal attachment designed to hold different weapons. The film was originally created as a television movie and pilot for a proposed series called House of Wax. Network concerns about its intensity helped send it to theaters instead, making it one of the clearest examples of 60s television horror exceeding the limits prepared for it. Crevette's return drives the plot. He adopts a new identity, transforms a woman into an accomplice, and hunts the people responsible for his capture. The Wax Museum investigators gradually recognize that each new crime is part of an organized revenge campaign. The most famous gimmicks were the horror horn and fear flasher, warnings that announced approaching moments of violence. Instead of protecting viewers, the signals increased anticipation by telling them something terrible was seconds away. What made Chamber of Horrors go too far was the combination of mutilation, weaponized prosthetics, and deliberate spectacle. Crevette does not merely attack. He designs scenes intended to humiliate victims and shock witnesses. The Wax Museum setting adds another layer of unease. Artificial bodies stand beside real danger, and historical displays make current crimes appear like the next exhibit waiting to be completed. Television executives believed the material was too intense for home broadcast in its planned form. That judgment became part of the movie's identity. It is not simply a horror film connected to television. It is a project pushed out of television because the small screen was not yet ready to admit how far its own productions could go. His careful manners make every threatened scene feel even colder. Number 4. The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, 1968. Dr. Henry Jekyll believes that human beings contain opposing moral forces that science can separate. He imagines freeing the better self from destructive impulses, but his chemical experiment releases Edward Hyde, a personality without restraint, compassion, or fear of consequences. Jack Palance performs both roles without relying on an enormous creature mask. Changes in posture, breathing, voice, and physical confidence create the transformation. His Hyde seems less like a separate being than a part of Jekyll that has been waiting for permission. The transformation scenes form the movie's visual center. Jekyll's controlled body twists as the formula takes effect, and his expression changes from terror to pleasure. The horror comes from recognizing that Hyde enjoys the freedom Jekyll publicly condemns. Produced for television by Dan Curtis, the film surrounds Palance, with actors including Denholm Elliott and Billy Whitelaw. Its period design and serious performances give the story unusual weight, while the domestic format places Jekyll's moral collapse directly inside the viewer's home. What made this version go too far was the emotional violence inflicted on people who trust him. Jekyll's experiment does not endanger anonymous strangers alone. It weaponizes every resentment, appetite, and selfish desire he has hidden from friends and loved ones. The story also refuses his favorite excuse. Hyde may feel separate, but Jekyll repeatedly chooses to take the formula after understanding what the transformation allows. Each dose becomes consent. Science opens the door, yet Jekyll continues walking through because Hyde offers pleasure without immediate shame. The final horror is responsibility. Jekyll wants praise for creating life-changing knowledge while denying blame for its consequences. The movie tears that defense apart. Hyde is not an intruder who steals Jekyll's body. He is the identity Jekyll creates, protects, and secretly values, until the distinction between respected doctor and violent alter ego can no longer save either one. Number 3. Daughter of the Mind, 1969. Professor Samuel Constable, a respected expert in cybernetics, becomes convinced that his deceased daughter Mary is communicating with him. Her image appears, her voice is heard, and physical evidence seems to prove that contact has crossed the boundary between death and life. Government officials fear that hostile agents may be exploiting the professor's grief to influence his work. Psychic investigator Alex Lauder is asked to determine whether the haunting is supernatural, fraudulent, or part of an intelligence operation designed to reach a vulnerable scientist. The film's most haunting scenes place Mary's image before her father. She appears familiar, frightened, and emotionally precise, saying what a grieving parent most desperately wants to hear. Whether the figure is truly Mary becomes almost less important than Constable's need to believe that love has defeated final separation. Ray Milland gives the professor dignity rather than simple gullibility. Don Murray's investigator begins from skepticism but cannot dismiss every event, while Gene Tierney brings emotional gravity to a household caught between private mourning and public danger. What made Daughter of the Mind go too far was its Cold War use of bereavement. Grief becomes a security weakness, and the memory of a dead child becomes the perfect instrument for manipulating a powerful man. Technology, espionage, psychology, and the supernatural all compete to explain the same painful evidence. The movie understands that the most effective ghost would not arrive screaming. It would appear gently, use a familiar voice, and ask to be trusted. A frightening apparition can be rejected. A daughter apparently reaching back toward her father is almost impossible to abandon. The investigation, therefore, becomes morally uncomfortable. Proving a fraud may protect national security, but destroy Constable emotionally. Proving a haunting may overturn everything science claims to know. Every answer demands a sacrifice, and the professor remains trapped between reason and the possibility of hearing Mary one more time. Number 2. The Ghost of Sierra de Cobre, 1964. Architect Nelson Orion also investigates reports of paranormal activity. He is contacted after a wealthy family experiences an event involving a mausoleum, an elderly woman named Paulina, and a telephone installed because she feared being buried alive. After her death, the telephone rings from inside the crypt. That single idea gives the movie one of early television horror's greatest openings. A device intended to provide reassurance becomes evidence that the grave may not be silent. The ringing is ordinary, mechanical, and therefore more disturbing than a distant scream. Orion investigates the Mandor family and discovers that Paulina appears determined to continue controlling her daughter-in-law Vivia. The haunting involves guilt, domination, and the possibility that fear itself has been carefully staged. Every explanation creates another question about who benefits from Vivia's terror. Martin Landau plays Orion with intelligence and restraint, while Judith Anderson brings the authority of classic Gothic cinema to Paulina. Conrad Hall's cinematography gives the film deep shadows, severe architecture, and compositions far more polished than viewers expected from an unsold television pilot. Writer-director Joseph Stefano, who wrote the screenplay for Psycho, originally developed the project as The Haunted. When a series was not ordered, additional material transformed it into a standalone television film. What made The Ghost of Sierra de Cobre go too far was its visual and emotional seriousness. It did not treat the supernatural as a temporary gimmick before a commercial break. It allowed grief, family power, and possible madness to fill every room. The telephone remains its perfect symbol. It creates a direct line between the comfortable house and the sealed tomb, between the living woman seeking freedom and the dead matriarch who may refuse to surrender control. Once that bell rings from inside the mausoleum, every rational explanation feels less comforting than the ghost. Number 1. Fear No Evil, 1969. Psychologist and occult specialist David Sorrell investigates the sudden death of a young man who recently acquired an antique mirror. The man's widow begins dreaming that her husband is calling to her from inside the glass, inviting her to join him where separation no longer exists. Sorrell initially searches for psychological explanations. Grief can produce visions, dreams can repeat desire, and reflective surfaces can encourage projection. Yet the mirror is connected to a secretive group practicing ancient rituals, and physical events begin exceeding what suggestion alone can explain. The most memorable sequence shows the dead husband's image appearing where an ordinary reflection should be. The widow moves toward him emotionally, even while understanding that something about the invitation is wrong. The mirror does not show a random monster. It shows the person she most desperately wants back. Louis Jourdan gives Sorrell an elegant, controlled presence, making him a convincing bridge between academic investigation and occult danger. Linda Day George, Carol O'Connor, and Wilfred Hyde White support a story that looks and feels more cinematic than most television pilots of the period. Broadcast in March 1969, Fear No Evil was intended to launch a continuing series. Its success produced the later television film Ritual of Evil, although the weekly program never appeared. What pushed the movie too far was its treatment of grief as a doorway. The supernatural force does not rely on violence at first. It offers reunion. That emotional promise makes every warning sound cruel, as though Sorrel is asking the widow to abandon her husband a second time. Mirrors are frightening because they appear truthful. People trust them to return reality without interpretation. This mirror weaponizes that trust, replacing reflection with desire. A covered glass can be avoided. A loved one waiting behind it is much harder to resist. The film's deepest terror is that the victim may understand the trap completely and still choose to step closer because false hope feels kinder than permanent loss. The 1960s produced fewer feature-length television horror movies than the decade that followed. But these broadcasts created the foundation. They brought haunted houses, living objects, occult investigators, forbidden science, and merciless endings into ordinary homes. Which forgotten production deserves to be rediscovered, and which one went too far even for you? Share your choice below. Like the video, subscribe for more classic film history, and watch our next countdown before another lost television nightmare disappears from memory forever.